How's that saying go? Home is where the heart is. A place to get away from the madness that is our world. A place to unwind and be around those you love. Well, sometimes things take a turn for the worst when you arrive home only to find a complete stranger. So, on today's episode of Scary Stories, we'll be covering experiences you've all had with burglars, home intruders, and much, much more. And remember, if you'd like to be part of a future episode, then make sure to submit your story at tcfnarrations@gmail.com. Just to make sure it hasn't been sent in to another narrator or posted online. That way, every time you click on one of my new videos, you're getting something new each time. Anyways, friends, let's get started. Number 1. Cat versus armed intruder. This happened in the early 2000s in suburban Middle America when I was around 13 or 14 years old. My parents had been out of town for a week for one of their friends' weddings in Las Vegas, which just left myself and my cat Rosie home alone. My neighbors, who were pretty much like my second family, would end up looking after me. Both of them were elderly. The man Charles was around 72 years of age. Meanwhile, his wife Cindy was around 67 or 68. I recall them always making me lunch and dinner, and they would even check up on me every single night before I went to bed. This was why my parents were so trusting with me staying by myself. In summary, I wasn't worrying about any issues. Anyways, a few days after my parents had left, I remember being up until around 2 a.m., playing Sonic Adventure 2 and munching on some hot Cheetos. As I sat there with the glow of the television shining against my glasses, my cat Rosie began to meow. Now, let's face it, cats meow is a normal behavior. This meowing, however, wasn't her typical meow. No, it was more of the kind she does when she's about to scrap with another cat. Any cat owners can attest to this. While thinking she was seeing an animal through the window, I ignored her and I continued to battle robots and collect rings. 5 or so minutes of continuous meowing and hissing began to get on my nerves. Thus, I finally get up and take a look out the window. But I don't see a thing. Oh, Rosie, I don't know what's wrong with you, but I think it's time to go to bed. Come on, let's go, I told her, as I yawned and then rubbed my eyes, which were beginning to irritate me. Just when I was about to return to take a seat on my lazy boy, however, Rosie suddenly takes off, and I hear what sounds like something crashing. It literally made me jump out of my sandals, as I began questioning what the source of the noise could have been. We do have a small set of woods behind my home, and it's pretty common to get raccoons. There was even once I had to book it back into the house, since there were a couple of coyotes roaming about. Well, thinking I was going to need to chase more of these furry little bandits, I grabbed some extra sandals to throw, and I began marching my way to the back door. I don't make it too far, since standing in my kitchen was a tall and lanky figure. Bear in mind, the only light in the house was coming from my bedroom, which meant my natural night vision hadn't exactly kicked in. Still, with the moonlight shining through one of the windows, I was able to see enough details to confirm somebody had broken in. This was accompanied by my cat Rosie, who was standing just a few feet from this figure, hissing up a storm and ready to attack. I remember standing there frozen with fear when I saw a sharp object in their hand, which was later confirmed to be a knife. "Get out of my house, now!" I screamed, in the most intimidating voice I could muster up. This did no good, as the figure inched their way closer, eventually landing themselves in the glow of the moonlight. It was a man with a large scruffy beard and bald head. After a brief stare down, the man starts to speak up, and he begins to curse at me. Bad words aside, I could tell he must have been drunk because of the way he spoke and his sporadic movements. I was already starting to back away. Meanwhile, Rosie just stood there. All of a sudden, Rosie goes into this crazy lion mode, as I like to call it. She jumps right at this guy's face, He then tries to swipe her off using his blade, but since Rosie was so quick and strong, he drops the knife while Rosie is going to town. The man then begins to stumble back as I take the opportunity to kick the knife under the refrigerator. Eventually, Rosie jumps off of the home intruder, and he books it out of the home, tripping and falling on the outdoor back patio staircase. Rosie was continuing to hiss while I watched the creep stumble into the woods. This was my chance to quickly shut the door and then call my neighbor Charles. No kidding, in less than 30 seconds, Charles runs out of his home in just his t-shirt, boxers, his sandals, and holding one of his shotguns. He then heads into the woods to chase after the man. Meanwhile, I go ahead and call the police. Charles was unsuccessful in locating the creep, and when officers got there 6 to 7 minutes later, I gave them my statement, as well as a description. Oh yeah, and I told them about the knife, which they retrieved from under the refrigerator and used as evidence. Surprisingly, they had a general idea of who I was talking about, and thank goodness that the following morning, I was informed they had caught and arrested him. Talk about quick. Well, it turns out when you've got a dude full of cat scratches on their face, it makes for quite a simple culprit to find. From what I heard, he was intoxicated that evening, not that they needed to reassure me, and he was connected to some armed robberies too. And get this, he had recently been let out of jail a month prior. Edit. For those wondering how he managed to get into my home, it's because dumb me forgot to properly lock the back door. I guess when you live in a neighborhood that sees its people leave doors and windows unlocked, it's safe to say things are relatively calm. Well, after that evening, everybody in my neighborhood locked their doors and their windows. Number 2. Showing up to armed burglars. Here's some background context to get you started. This was in the early 1990s, when I lived alone on the outskirts of a major city in northern Colorado. It was your typical suburban life where everybody knew each other and people were always very trusting. About a year before my experience, we had 2 home break-ins in the surrounding neighborhoods, with each burglar being caught just a few days after committing their deed. You would think the word would have gotten around about choosing a different location to attempt to rob families, but it seemed that memo hadn't gotten across to all home intruders. Anyways, one day I'd started my brand new hours at my job as a security guard, which meant I didn't arrive home until about 4 a.m. As soon as I approached my front door, I noticed it was unlocked. This sent chills since I've always been the type of person to lock all doors and windows, especially after the break-ins. Therefore, I returned to my vehicle and I armed myself with my .38 Special that was in my glove compartment, and then I started to do a scan of my home. The first floor was clear, but it became evident quite quickly something was off. The most obvious detail was the place was a mess. Drawers from cabinets had been left open, with some of their belongings missing, but perhaps what really sent me into a panic were the footsteps I was hearing coming from just above me. Now, the smart thing to do would have been to leave my home and call for police from the safety of my vehicle, but I took matters into my own hands. That's why I began to tiptoe my way to the second story, in hopes I could catch the burglar red-handed. About halfway up the steps, the noises came to a halt, and I was able to hear faint whispering. "Whoever's in my home, you need to leave immediately. I'm armed, and I will shoot if you don't listen to my commands." If only I knew I had just kicked the bee's nest, so to speak. All of a sudden, with the glow of a nightlight illuminating the hallway, I see faint outlines of 2 figures peeking out from one of my bedrooms. Then, there is a series of bright flashes that shine, with accompanying loud bangs. These 2 were also armed, and they fired directly at me. I'm just so thankful the house was dark, because if they had seen exactly where I was located, that would have been it for me. I get out and dodge as I fell about halfway down the staircase to the bottom, spraining my ankle in the process. Those next moments felt like they went in slow motion, as I could hear the two home intruders begin to make their way toward me. It's at this moment I had to act quickly, as I had no clue to how many more people there were. So I make a quick decision to crawl and hide in the small closet that's right underneath the staircase, as there is no way I would have had enough time to run. Surprisingly, this ended up working, because the home intruders never bothered to come and check there. All I could hear was one of them say something like,
"Dude, he probably already went to a neighbor. Let's get out of here before he spots us."
I hadn't actually seen them, but just their voice alone sounded as if they came from teenagers. Nevertheless, I sat in that closet for what felt like an eternity before I was able to hear one of my neighbors call out my name. When I met up with him, he told me he heard gunshots and came over to investigate in concern. Once all was said and done, some paramedics checked up on me, and I ended up staying over at my parents' house for the following week. Sadly, police were never able to catch the guys who broke into my home, and I never did get back the money they took, about $3,000 in cash savings. They also made off with some jewelry. Very unfortunate, and as I sit here writing this out for you, I do wonder, what would have happened had I been home and sleeping in bed? What I thought was a curse in my work schedule turned out to be a blessing in disguise. I will tell you one thing. If those two were so willing to shoot at me, what would have stopped them from doing so had they seen me sleeping? A creepy thought, for sure. Number 3. Swinging for the fences. As you listen to this story, keep this idea in mind. Make sure that if you're home alone, you lock your doors and windows. It can get quite comforting to live in a neighborhood that sees almost no activity, but you would be surprised. It's the places you least expect to have a scary experience. After all, if you were to tell me I would have my house broken into, I would look at you and say, "You've been listening to way too many scary stories." But here we are. So, taking place around 2015 when I was 16, I'm female by the way, I was home alone. As for my mom and dad, they had still been at work, which was common routine during the summer. So I recall watching SpongeBob and drawing on my iPad, when all of a sudden, I began to hear footsteps coming from the downstairs living room. Now, the time was roughly 3 p.m., and with my parents not arriving until 6 p.m., I grabbed my baseball bat, and then I began heading to the staircase to go and check things out. I don't even make it halfway down the steps, because in the living room, I am able to see a homeless-looking man lurking into some of the drawers. I wasn't able to see his face since he had his back turned, but I will describe what I saw in that moment. He had a red ripped-up sweater and dark blue jeans with long dreadlock hair. In one of his hands, I could even see him gripping onto a screwdriver. Well, I watched him for a few seconds, as he then heads towards my kitchen, and I lose sight of him. I know I should have gone back to my room and grabbed my phone, but I wanted to make sure he wasn't going to grab a knife or anything. Anyways, I peek into the kitchen from the living room hallway, and I saw as the man began drinking milk out of one of our milk cartons. Talk about disgusting. At least pour it into a cup. All kidding aside, I finally made my presence known by speaking in the most adult voice I could muster. "Excuse me, but could I help you with something?" Like a scene you watch in a cartoon, he spits the milk out in shock, and then immediately jumps up to face me. The dude was a lot scarier face to face.
"No, I'm just eating."
"Yeah, I can see that, pal, but this isn't your house. You need to leave right now." No kidding. The dude goes into a rant about how I was the one inside his house, and he was the homeowner. But that was just some of the mild things he spoke to me of. He started talking nonsense about how he was the chosen one, and he was the king of the world. And then out of nowhere, he asked me to marry him, or even become his princess, and together we were supposed to take a rocket ship into outer space. The dude was definitely having some sort of trip, and I make it known that police were already on their way. That was a big mistake. Suddenly, he flips out and he begins pushing over chairs along with the kitchen table. As I stood there staring at him, he began charging at me. Naturally, I booked it to the staircase, but he was fast enough that he actually manages to get a hold of my arm. Big mistake for him. With the other arm holding the baseball bat, I use all of my might and I swing for the fences, connecting with his knee, causing him to lose his grasp and fall onto the carpet. Eventually, I make it to my room, where I began to call for help. Unfortunately, my nightmare wasn't exactly over. Thinking the guy would have just either 1, stayed downstairs, or 2, crawled his way out of my home, was surprised to see that he essentially no-selled my baseball bat to his knee because I was able to hear him pounding at my bedroom door.
Just wait until I get my hands on you. Open the door. You're only making this worse for yourself.
Huh? Worse for me or worse for him? Either way, I wasn't taking any chances, so I pushed one of my chairs against the doorknob in hopes of stopping him from entering. That seemed to work because I no longer heard him after about 2 minutes. Now, thank goodness the police station is literally a quarter of a mile away from my house because they got there in record time and they managed to catch him stumbling around in my backyard. I didn't hear much of what happened after that. I just gave them a description of what took place and they told me they would be in contact with more details. I think at that moment, I was more concerned they might have said something for me using the baseball bat, but it didn't seem they had made a big deal. Nevertheless, they didn't call me back, so I assumed the issue was resolved. My dad did, however, get all the locks in the house changed, as well as getting a security system installed. Oh, and the way he got in was through one of the side windows, which my dad was procrastinating in getting fixed. For whatever reason, the locking mechanism wasn't working properly, which meant that with enough force, you can open it. He had then used the screwdriver to pry open the screen, and that's when he opened the window, with almost no effort. Number 4. Not your typical home intruder. Before I get started, I want to preface by saying this. My scary story is a little bit different. Without spoiling too much, I think this was a tad bit more frightening than your typical let's not meet story. Reason being was because I was almost torn into shreds, and I'm not even exaggerating. You'll hear why in a moment. Let me begin. What's one of the greatest parts about summer vacation? Is it going out to the beach with friends and soaking in the sun? Or is it going to the mall and shopping for the latest and greatest fashion designs? That stuff's pretty boring, at least in my eyes. The definition of summer vacation for me is about staying up late, then waking up until 3 in the afternoon. That is combined, of course, with video games, binge watching movies, and cups of noodles for days. That's how one of my days had started after staying up the previous evening playing Kingdom Hearts 2. This time, however, my parents had given me some chores. There was also an ultimatum. If I didn't complete them, they would ground me for a week. The last thing you would want is to have your fun taken away from you. Anyways, after lazying around for about an hour, I finally got to cleaning. I began by mopping the kitchen, cleaning the stove, and then washing all the dirty dishes, which most of the dishes came from me. That took me about 50 or so minutes. From there, I moved to vacuuming and dusting the living room, and then finally, the part I'd been regretting the most, the restroom. I mean, the good thing is my parents are pretty on top of that, which saved me quite a bit of work. Still, this would require me to head into the garage so that I could go get the cleaning supplies. The garage, by the way, is connected to the kitchen. That was very convenient for me, as we had an extra refrigerator in there that was full of Capri Suns, Sunny D, and other sorts of sodas. I figured I could grab a Capri Sun while I was in there, along with some chips to reward my hard work thus far. Now, so far things seem like just a typical day of cleaning. What could possibly be so creepy or scary about my submission? I'm about to get to that. As I'm a bit of a music buff, I tend to listen to music at all hours of the day. Seriously, my earbuds very rarely leave my ears. This turned out to be a big mistake, because I wasn't aware of what was waiting for me in the garage. Anywho, without wasting any more time, I opened the door from the kitchen to the garage, and I noticed two things. One, I hadn't closed the garage side door that leads you into the backyard. I'd used that door only an hour earlier to throw the trash away. Here's the second thing. I didn't hear it, but I was able to see movement behind some large boxes. Immediately, I thought of the raccoon family that has been showing up to my house for the past month and snatching our food. Therefore, I thought I would get the jump on them by turning on the flashlight on my phone and scaring them. Well, I approach, and instead of seeing furry little pandas, I saw the complete opposite. There was a huge hunk of black fur, which then turned its attention to me. No joke, in my garage was a black bear from the nearby forest. I don't know what happened, but it's like suddenly I locked in place. It's like my brain was yelling at me to move, but my body was saying, nope. The bear, startled by my presence, let out a sudden roar, which overwhelmed my music. That finally seemed to indicate to my legs, move, and move I did. I run into the kitchen as the bear comes after me, knocking over boxes in its wake. The bear had actually gotten so close, it managed to lunge and claw off some of the back of my t-shirt with its large paws. And it wasn't until a few moments later I realized how lucky I was to have gotten out of that without a single claw mark on my back. Thankfully, it seemed the bear got confused when it was unable to reach me with a locked door between the two of us. And a few moments after, we did this sort of comedic stare down through the door's window before the bear seemed to have lost interest. By this point, I'm desperately trying to catch my breath from the adrenaline rush, not sure of who exactly I was going to call. After thinking about it for a minute, I called both the police department and my parents. 30 minutes later, with a joint effort with wildlife control and park rangers, they were able to get the bear back into the forest, who by that point had already moved on to another neighbor's home, going through their garbage bins. So, that's my scary story of the bear who broke into my home, only for me to startle it and it get angry, then have it chase me, almost ripping me to shreds. Next time, I think I'll stick to the sound of silence. That way I can be aware of any possible home intruders. Number 5. Waiting on the technician. This was a few years ago, when I just gotten home from my third shift, stocking shelves at Sprouts. For those of you who aren't in the US, Sprouts is basically an organic grocery store, which is where I continue to work at today. Anyways, I was extra tired this one early morning as I pulled up into my driveway at roughly 6 a.m. and stepped into the shower just a few minutes later. Once I finished, I went into the kitchen to greet my parents, who were just about ready to head to work. My dad ended up reminding me that between 2 to 5 p.m., Avis, which is a company that services air conditioners, would be sending out one of their technicians to do the 6-month unit checkup. I assured him I would set an alarm for right before the given time, and I wished them a goodbye as they leave 10 or so minutes later. Finally, with a quiet and empty home, I head back into my room and I crash on the bed. I must have really dozed off, because when I finally realized the constant ringing I was hearing wasn't me dreaming, I wake up to see it's past 3 p.m. Great. I wasn't going to hear the end of it if my dad ended up finding out I slept through the meetup time. Luckily, I had no missed calls from the technician, which means I'd gotten off pretty lucky. Fast forward about 30 to 40 minutes of me laying in bed watching videos, when someone began knocking at the front door. I sighed in disappointment, as I now needed to leave my room. Now, anytime I'm about to open the door, I always make sure to look through the peephole. I want to blame, or should I say, thank you, to listening to scary stories as a reasoning behind this precaution. Also, another small note. We have one of those screen doors which is useful during the summer months. Anyways, through the small hole and filter of the screen, I am able to see a man in typical street clothing. I'm talking about sweater and jeans, sunglasses, and baseball cap. "Hello there, can I help you with something?" I said to the man, who began to tell me he was with the Edison Power Company and needed to come inside and check the circuit breaker. All of this, mind you, with the safety of the screen door keeping us a few inches apart. Talk about a lame outfit. As far as I knew, they were supposed to have a certain uniform. But forget the uniform. I saw no vehicle that said Edison, or any sort of distinguishable details in his clothing telling me he was with somebody. As you can imagine, I was beginning to question his true motives, as I then asked him why he needed to come inside the house, since the circuit breaker was in the backyard. Catching him in his lie, I can see the visible expression of confidence turn into one of panic.
"That's not important. I need to test your outlets. We've been getting reports from neighbors of power surges."
Now, I'm no expert with electricity, but wouldn't the last thing you want to do is stick a device in a live power outlet? You'd want to turn the power off, right? Also, I've noticed this entire time he had no sort of equipment on him. Was there something I was missing? All questioning aside, I tell him I would go ahead and call Edison, and he just freaks out.
"No, you don't have to do that,"
he angrily snapped back, taking out a knife from his back pocket, then beginning to rip open my screen door. I panicked, and I immediately shut the door on him, and then booked it to grab my cell phone. This wasn't without me hearing what sounded like my back door being kicked at. I went to go see what was happening, and I saw another man, dressed in similar attire, attempting to make his way in. By this point, I'm on the verge of passing out from pure adrenaline, but thankfully it seemed as if both gave up when I was able to hear somebody yelling at them. Just like clockwork, I went to take a peek through the front window, and I could see Avis had arrived. Both technicians must have realized something was seriously wrong, because one of them was on their cell phone, while the other started to chase after the two. I didn't get to see the rest, since they left my line of sight, but I later learned that one on the cell phone had called police because he saw one of them was carrying a pistol. For real, those two had some serious guts to go after some armed burglars. Anyways, I met up with the technicians just a minute or two later, and when police arrived, we each gave our statements. This included giving details of the individuals, describing their getaway vehicles, as well as me showing them our home security footage. Fast forward about a week later, they ended up tracking the two down and arresting them in connection with a series of armed robberies and home break-ins. So, friends, if there's anything I can leave you with as a learning lesson, it's the following. If you have the opportunity to check who's outside your home, whether it be through a window or through a peephole, make sure to do so. Also, don't be afraid to ask for ID or anything that might indicate who they are. And lastly, if at any time you feel you're in danger or the person is acting suspicious, don't be afraid to close your door and call the police. It's better to be an inconvenience than to deal with a potential armed intruder. After all, it's your home. Protect it. Number 6. Go back to bed. Listening to one of your Home Alone stories videos has reminded me of a scary experience I had when I was in junior high school. It's about the time somebody broke into my home. For some context, this was sometime in the early 2000s when I lived in a private gated-off community in northern Wisconsin. Those homes were protected by security guards, which you had to present a key card to them in order to enter the neighborhoods. Sometimes the security guards would get lazy and they would let other vehicles piggyback right alongside the previous vehicle that had entered just a second ago. I remember this for a fact because my friends would do it all the time. Maybe it was because they recognized the people who constantly came in and out, but I guess I'll never truly know. Anyways, on to the evening in question. It was late into the night when I was suddenly awoken by what sounded like footsteps in my room. Slowly I drifted out of my dream of infinite ice cream and cookies to see a tall hooded figure that was going through my drawers. "Dad, what are you doing in my room?" Who I thought was my dad continued to search through my drawers, and then they responded back to me with,
"Go back to bed, honey. You have school in a few hours."
Maybe it was because I was so out of it from just waking up, but something about the voice was off, and I mean way off. It sounded way too deep to be coming from my dad, but since I was so sleepy, I didn't bother saying a thing. Thus I closed my eyes for a couple of minutes, only to finally say in my head, "You know what? Something's not right." So I put on some slippers and head down the hallway, where I can see that same figure walking into my parents' room. Quickly I followed, and I get a shock of a lifetime. In the bed, I can see both my mom and dad are fast asleep. Meanwhile, this intruder was just beginning to grab some things from the nightstand. This was really scary. It was made worse because I could see the man was grasping a pistol. Now, did I dare shout and wake up my parents? If I did, would that be putting us all at risk? Well, I wasn't too sure what to do. That's why I just stood there and watched from the darkness. But then out of nowhere, he finally begins to make his way back toward the hallway. I had no time to react, as he ended up spotting me.
"Shh, be quiet, and I promise I won't hurt you."
Try as I did to hold it back, I screamed at the top of my lungs, as my voice echoed along the dark corridors. Instantly I hear my parents yell from the sudden disruption, and this man books it out of the front door.
"What in the world is going on?"
My dad angrily snapped as I chase after the intruder. I saw him get into an unmarked minivan that was parked in our driveway, and he stormed down the street just a few moments later. By the time my dad caught up to him, he had just missed the action. So, with my knowledge of the getaway vehicle, including the security footage that was caught of his vehicle at the entrance checkpoint, they were able to identify the individual with the license plate number. He was eventually caught and connected with another series of break-ins that occurred in the previous months. I won't lie, but it was nice to know justice was served. But I still sometimes get the chills knowing that he somehow managed to get into that gated community with no problem. Something told me that whoever the security guard was that night ended up getting fired. Number 7. He was living in our home. When I was around 14 years old, my family and I lived in rural Pennsylvania. Our neighbors, if you really want to refer to them as such, were very spread apart. I want to say the closest was at least half a mile away. In between the homes were acres of forests where it was very common to hear hunters in the summer months. They never bothered anyone, as they tended to their own business. It seemed that idea of never being bothered would change for the worse. I remember one evening, my family and I were just returning from watching a movie in town, and as we pulled into the driveway, my mom and dad claimed to have seen a figure that walked behind our home. As my sister and I were in the back seat, we were unable to witness this strange sighting. So my dad told us to remain in the vehicle as he does a quick scan of our property. He was unsuccessful in finding anyone, thus they blamed the sighting on their imagination. Following that evening, it seemed that for the next few days both my sister and I would hear very strange noises that came from the downstairs basement. Now, we did have a washing machine in there, but I'm talking about noise being made when that thing was shut off, and in the middle of the night. Noises That sounded like footsteps. Each time my parents would keep explaining the noises is just creaks of the old house adjusting to the temperatures of the night and day, which made sense in their mind. However, when food and water began mysteriously disappearing, I began to question whether or not my sister was eating more. She told me she thought I was the one taking all the food, thus creating this back and forth that was eventually explained as our parents eating it. One day, both myself and my sister stumbled into something that raised some serious alarms. As we stay home alone during the summer, we do tend to play a lot in the backyard. Well, we had been playing soccer when I had accidentally kicked the ball a little too hard, causing it to roll into the nearby forest. Thus, my sister and I went to retrieve it, and we stumbled into what looked like a campsite. It's here we found some leftover cans of food, water bottles, and even a sharp knife. It was very eerie, so when we explained it to our parents, my dad went to go check, and he returned with a simple explanation. "Oh, don't worry about that, kiddos. That was most likely just a couple of the hunters I talked to a few days ago. I asked them not to camp near the house, but it seems they did so anyways. I'll make sure to let them know next time I see them." Why my dad kept insisting to act as if nothing was up is beyond me. I think it's because he's always been level-headed. That would be tested a few nights later. I want to say it was past 3 in the morning, and I woke up with a bad urge to go and pee. Once I do that, I decided to head to the kitchen to go and grab myself some milk and cookies. Here's the thing. Right as I'm about to turn the corner into the kitchen, I see a figure crouched in front of the refrigerator, appearing to be eating. "Hey, Dad? Is that you?" The person pauses, and with a very creepy tone, they reply back to me with,
Yeah, son. Why don't you go back to bed? It's very late."
That was not my dad's voice. Instinctively, I run to my parents' room and I wake my dad, who was very angry with my sudden disturbance. I remember over-exaggerating the situation by telling him there was a guy that was armed, and that finally seemed to have snapped him out of it. Now, this next part is a recollection from what my dad had told me, since he had myself, my sister, and my mom locked in the room. When he went into the kitchen, he saw no one. However, as he walked by the basement door, he noticed 2 things. 1, the basement door was open, and 2, there was a sudden loud crash, which we also happened to hear. When Dad goes down there, he manages to catch somebody in the process of moving some wooden panels in the wall. My dad, with his shotgun, then demands the person to get out, and he does. Now, the answer to the question, who was the man? Well, it turned out to be the previous owner, the one we had purchased the home from just a few months prior. He apparently had grown an obsession with her mom, and he couldn't live without seeing her. That's why he moved in, so to speak, taking advantage of a small living space that we had no idea existed. In that small living space were photos he had taken. He had some food, water bottles, toilet paper, blankets and pillows, and creepiest of all, a revolver. Very strange. Needless to say, police managed to catch and arrest him, and we have never heard from him again. Number 8. My dog takes on a home intruder. Hey there, Creepy Fox, a long-time listener here. I've got a personal story I want to share that involves my hero dog. I haven't really heard too many of these sorts of experiences, so I hope this one stands out. Let's begin. This was sometime in the late 90s, when I was roughly 14 or 15. I was a single child with just my dad, and we were living in Honolulu in Hawaii. At the time, it had been about 5 or 6 months since my mother's passing, and I rarely saw my dad. This was because he had to pick up a second job to take care of the bills, which meant I was always by myself. As a birthday present, My dad ended up adopting a wonderful German shepherd named Mason. He pretty much became like a brother to me. We would play every single day, go for walks, and stay up all night and watch reruns of my favorite cartoons. Anyways, on to a random evening in July. It was around 11 p.m., and I had just finished eating the leftover pizza from just hours earlier. I gathered my paper plate, napkins, and pizza box, and I head out the back door so that I could throw the trash in the bin. However, unable to locate said trash bins, I realized the next morning was trash pickup day, which means my dad had already put the garbage bins on the front street. Therefore, I used the side door to make my way over there, and I began to throw away the trash. But then, I was able to hear it, the distinct sound of bushes shaking, followed by what sounded like movement. Assuming it was a neighborhood cat, I returned to the backyard from where I had originally exited. It's only moments later, it ends up happening. In my peripheral vision, I see a tall, dark figure begin to approach me. I wasted no time to see who it was. I opened the back door with lightning reflexes, only to be caught closing it in the process. Somebody in a ski mask was just entering my home. I freaked out and began running back to my room, only to be met halfway with Mason. He runs past me, and moments later, I heard him growl and bark. I made my way over to him, and I can see this masked individual just standing a few feet from Mason, staring at him. Mason, attack! Let's just say that masked dude wasted no more time in my home. He leaves, dropping what looked to be a sharp object in the process, which turned out to be a knife. He then runs to the back fence and jumps over it, with Mason following close behind him. After he'd gotten away, Mason runs back to me, and we went ahead and locked everything. I don't know why I chose not to call the cops, but I did inform my father, who immediately drove back home 20 minutes later. As far as I know, he was never caught. Number 9. Stalker breaks into apartment. This happened to me just a few years ago, and it's a serious reminder of how certain people take things just a bit too far. To think, someone you don't even know could break into your house. That's a very scary thought. But before I get into the break-in, let me give you the backstory that leads up to it. For context, I'm female, 27 years old, and I work as a barista for one of those mom-and-pop coffee shops. As I live in a small town, it's very easy to grow accustomed to the regulars and gain the ability to distinguish between friends and strangers. With that said, it was early on in my shift, and an older man shows up, saying it was his first time here and that he needed a minute to think of what he wanted. I told him to take his time since there was no one behind him, and I got to baking.
"What's your name, sweetheart?"
I heard the man mumble as I closed the oven filled with delicious sweet bread. "Oh, my name's Jamie. Nice to meet you, sir," I replied back to him with a smile.
"Nice to meet you, Jamie. I'm sure you get this a lot, but you're very attractive."
I thanked him for the compliment, slightly unnerved by the fact he looked as if he could have easily been my grandfather. "So, do you know what you want already, sir?"
"Sure, I'll just take a large hot chocolate,"
I remember him saying as he started to look me up and down. I could tell, and he wasn't even making an effort to be low-key about it. Once he paid, I thought that would be the end of it, and I could get back to my life. He instead decided to sit at the bar that's right behind where I made the drinks, which made the situation that much more uncomfortable. How I kept wondering where all the customers were when I needed them. As for my coworkers, the next one wouldn't arrive for at least another 30 minutes.
"So, Jamie, do you have a boyfriend? If not, perhaps you'd like to go grab some lunch later today. What time do you get off?"
The man was very forward, but I reassured him I was seeing someone, which appeared to have angered him a bit. I ignored his further comments, giving him his hot chocolate, and heading to the cash register where a couple of guests had just entered. For the next 10 to 15 minutes, I served more customers, All the while, this man was sitting in the same spot watching me. At one point, I could even see him pointing his phone at me, which I'm pretty sure he was doing so, that way he could take pictures, or worse, video. I was growing very uncomfortable, and as soon as my fellow barista John had arrived, I led him into the back room to explain what was happening. He found the whole thing creepy, and he advised me to take an extra long break while he took care of the situation. I'm not sure what he told him, but by the time I stepped out, he was long gone. Fast forward the following couple of weeks, and he would show up to the coffee shop. These visits, however, were held back as he was a lot more polite with me and my fellow coworkers. Maybe he learned his lesson and decided to be a gentleman, but I would be very wrong. Fast forward another couple of weeks. My boyfriend and I had just returned from a double date with John, and we were heading to the second story of our apartment complex. When trying to look for the house key, we realized we had left it back in the car. However, instead of returning to the parking lot, we went ahead and looked under the doormat. The key was missing. That was weird. It was just there that morning from what I remembered. Regardless, my boyfriend heads to the car to retrieve it, and I wait next to her apartment. After a minute or so, I ended up hearing what sounded like something falling over inside her apartment. That rose some serious alarm bells. Finally, when my boyfriend arrives back, I explained the sounds, and he has me waiting outside. My boyfriend concealed carries, which was why he took the initiative. Not too long after he entered, I was able to hear an argument. I quickly run in there, and I see an absolute shock. Remember that weird old dude from the coffee shop? He was sitting on my bed with a switchblade. My boyfriend, with a tone I'd never heard him speak with, tells him to leave the apartment, or he was going to take actions into his own hands. So the man got up, dropping the switchblade, and then he just walked out of our apartment. I did manage to get some pictures and videos of him, which I then used as evidence to present to the police. He was rightfully put behind bars, and I got a restraining order placed against him. Oh, and yes, in case you're wondering, the reason the key was missing was because he had gotten it and then waited for me inside my apartment. Talk about one of the creepiest stories of my life. Before we get to the final story, I just wanted to go ahead and give you all a quick reminder. If you're ever looking for extra content, whether it be art, previews, or sneak peeks, then make sure to follow me over on my Instagram @TheCreepyFoxOfficial. Thank you. I'll see you there. But for now, let's get on to our final entry. Number 10. Returning the favor. Technically speaking, this submission doesn't count as a home intruder story, since the person, or should I say, persons, didn't actually break in, but it still fits with the theme of being at home. Here is a story that was sent in to me from a subscriber who was asked to remain anonymous. They wrote the following. Hey there, Creepy Fox. Now, I'm sure you're like me, and throughout your life you've ordered plenty of pizza deliveries to your house. I mean, what a convenience to be able to have a long and stressful day at work, and then reward yourself with a pizza. Beats cooking and washing dishes. Now, though that's all fun and games, what happens when you don't order a pizza? Still sounds nice, right? I mean, maybe it was delivered to the wrong house? Well, if it's paid for, why not accept it? You snooze, you lose, right? What I'm trying to get at here is the theme of being careful who you open the door for. You see, it had been another long day at the office around winter of 2015, but instead of ordering a pizza, I had bought some Panda Express that I had stopped by to pick up. While I sat in my kitchen, enjoying my mix of steamed vegetables and teriyaki chicken, somebody rang on the doorbell. Seeing as the clock read 8:30 p.m., I began wondering who could be here at such a late time. Perhaps it was a neighbor. Either way, I paused the video I was watching, and I head to the front door, making sure to look through the peephole. On the other side, I was able to see a man wearing a baseball hat and typical street clothing. Hello? Can I help you? I asked him, standing behind my locked door.
You ordered a pepperoni pizza, right? I'm here to deliver it.
He was holding a pizza box, which did seem to match with his story. But before I was about to open the door, I did notice something that caught my attention. He kept looking to his right and appeared to be whispering something to somebody who was just out of my line of sight. It raised some alarms. Thus, I asked him to give me a moment to go grab some money. He agreed, but instead of heading to my purse, I walk over to the window to get a better view. Just as I'd expected, there was another man who was holding onto a crowbar. That gave me the chills, which was why I decided to return the favor. If they were looking to scare me, actually scratch that. If they were looking to get me to open the door so they could break in, I'm going to give them the scare of a lifetime. I went to grab my pump-action shotgun, and then I opened my front window, and I exclaimed, "I can see what you're doing. I'm armed, and I'm not afraid to defend myself if I have to." That was all it took for them to book it, as I soon lost sight of them. The man who claimed to be delivering the pizza no longer had the box in his hand, which was why I opened the door to see where it had gone. It was dropped on the doorsteps. And guess what? The pizza box was empty, thus confirming my suspicions. Together with the help of police and my Ring doorbell camera, those two men were eventually caught. It's just nice to know that's two less bad guys out on the streets trying to get into my home, or whatever it was they had planned for me. Hello everybody, what is going on? It is the Creepy Fox wanting to say thank you for watching today's video. If you enjoyed it, make sure to leave a thumbs up and a comment telling me what you all thought about today's episode. Also, if you haven't done so, make sure and watch the previous videos from the last week. We did 3 uploads. I'm not sure if for whatever reason the notifications didn't go out or what happened. I'm not sure what happened, so make sure to go back and watch them. Also, I'm not sure why, but you know who you are. I'm looking right at you. I'm going to put it on screen right now, but according to my watch time analytics, many of you, you know who you are leaving after the last story, which is a shame because you're missing all the fun stuff. We do comments with Creepy, I give you all these fun little updates. Not sure why you all leave, but so with that, let's go ahead and get to the comments with Creepy, where we go to the previous video and I go ahead and check out what you all had to say. And this first comment, our first comment actually comes from a channel member. Shout out to Tabitha. Video came at the right time. Was a great listen while getting ready for work. Yeah, actually, she actually got early access to the video. She got it a day early. That's the cool thing about the channel memberships is you get early access to the new videos. You get all these other cool little things. You get shout outs in the videos. You get artwork for the videos, so the thumbnails and even the artwork in the video today. You get high quality versions of those, which is pretty neat. And then another cool thing is you actually get a little badge next to your name. Each month, as the months go on, you get a different badge. So the starter is a little Creepy Fox logo, and then from there you get some other cool little things, which is kind of cool. But thank you, Tabitha. I'm glad you were able to enjoy it. Our next comment comes to us from Elisa, and it says, "I'm going to meet you once Disneyland opens up." Well, I'm really hoping it opens up soon. As of right now, we're being told, which, let's face it, it's not going to happen. March 31st is the last day of the closure, and then we're back open April 1st. But I'm recording this on March 26th, and I can definitely tell you we are not going to open on April 1st. So I hope it opens soon because it'd be great to meet you, and as I've told everybody, if you're ever at Disneyland, when we do open, it'd be great to meet you. Come say hello, come say hi, don't be shy. I always love to meet everybody. I like the picture of the next person, Blue Yeti. Sometimes I see you post videos and I literally get so happy and excited to watch it. Well, I'm glad you get excited and you look forward to it. I always look forward to I can't speak. I always look forward to making these videos, and it's really nice to know that there's such amazing people like yourselves that actually stick around and watch the videos. So thank you. Ooh, actually, speaking of Amaya Senpai, he left a comment, and it says, "Wow, un saludo de parte de Amaya Senpai." Bueno, muchas gracias, Amaya Senpai. Me da mucho gusto conocerte, y muchas gracias por el arte. Here's a comment that comes to us from Lisa, and it says, "Thank you for putting stories out. I hope to hear more. It's nice to hear stories that haven't been read before on Reddit." Which is actually one of the cool things about my channel. I don't like to take stories from Reddit. I mean, if you're a narrator out there and you do that, that's cool. I mean, I don't mind. But me personally, the reason I don't do that is because a lot of narrators will go on like Let's Not Meet and No Sleep, things like that. I don't do that. I don't like to do that. Mainly because, like I said, a lot of people out there will read the same stories, and then, you look forward to a brand new video. You're like, yes, I'm so excited to watch this new video. And then you listen to it and you're like, oh wait, I've already heard half of these stories on another narrator's channel. So I don't like to do that to you guys because, it's very frustrating. So that's why I rely on all of you. Yes, you that are watching right now. Hello there. I rely on all of you who send the stories. So we kind of create this collaborative work where we work together to bring these stories together to everybody because, we like to hear brand new stories. That's always fun. And last but least, we have a comment from another channel member. This time it's from Bo, and it says, "Thank you, Creepy Fox, for the video. Really needed this to pass a slow Saturday. Thank you. Stay safe and stay clean." Thank you, friend. You too. So, friends, that's going to be it for today's video. Like I mentioned before, make sure to leave a comment, make sure to leave a like, and also make sure to subscribe if you're brand new. It's always nice to meet you all. But until then, friends, I've been the Creepy Fox, and you've been listening to Scary Stories. Talk to you all next time. Take care and have yourselves an amazing day.